I'm very excited today to introduce our speaker, Dr. Trevor James Bond, Professor and Associate Dean for Digital Initiatives and Special Collections at the WSU Libraries. I first was introduced to Dr. Bond when I began attending annual meetings of the Northwest Archivists in about 2001. Dr. Bond was one of the leaders of that organization, and through their publication, Easy Access, I was able to follow his career, including, as I recall, a sabbatical at Oxford, someplace really exotic and exciting anyway. Dr. Bond holds a master's in library and information science and master's in ancient history, both from UCLA, and a PhD from Washington State University. He has secured and worked on many grant-funded projects over the years, including from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the American Mellon Foundation, and the American Council of Learned Society. He is a frequent presenter at academic conferences and has many publications to his credit. He received the Washington State Historical Society's 2018 Charles Gates Memorial Award for his article, Documenting Missionaries and Indians, the Archive of Myron Eels. His own book, Coming Home to Nez Perce, and I'm going to skip the subtitle because I wouldn't know how to pronounce that, will be published next month by WSU Press. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Trevor James Bond.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen to make sure this works. Can you see that okay? Mm-hmm. Great. Before I get started, I just want to thank Gary and Carla and Jane for the invitation, and Niles and Bonnie for the beautiful keepsake. You may be able to see it. I have it framed on my wall there above my Mike McGill skateboard. It's a great pleasure to put on a suit, dig out my cufflinks out of my drawer and present to you today. And I want to thank my library friends, Jane Carlin and Amanda Roth, for being here. Also, Woolf scholars, Diane Gillespie and Helen Southworth, who's joining us from France. And also my former mentor, or current mentor, Susan Allen, who was head of special collections when I was a graduate student at UCLA back in the last century, and really served as an inspiring model for me to be a scholar and librarian. So it's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm going to show a lot of pictures, so even if the talk is horrible, I think you'll come away with a better understanding of the collections here. And also, if there's one thing that you take away with by the end of this talk, that is, I would love you to come to Pullman and spend some time with these books. I'm of the school of special collections librarian that collects and that works on collections so that they're used. I love people coming into the department and visiting the collections. And I promise if you do come to Pullman, I'll give you a behind the scenes tour of the staff only area so you can see the books in their splendor. So I'm presenting from Pullman, Washington. If you haven't been to Pullman before, it is truly a lovely place. Rolling hills, small towns, a couple of fine restaurants. This photograph on the lower part of the screen shows the Holland Library. It's the large rectangular 1950s building. And then if you look a little bit to your left, you'll see a glass dome there. And that's the dome above the atrium of the Terrell Library, where my department resides. And when you walk into the library, you can go down a series of granite steps into special collections. And before you enter the door, look up. For those of you who have not been to Pullman, it's about 90 miles south of Spokane from the map there. Pullman is a special place to me. I moved to Pullman sight unseen for a one-year temporary job in 1998, and I've been here ever since. I've really grown to love and appreciate the landscape, and I've had some wonderful opportunities to collaborate with members of the Nez Perce or Nimiipuu tribe. And I want to acknowledge that Washington State University is on the lands of the Palouse Band of Indians and the Nez Perce tribe, and to acknowledge their continuing presence since time immemorial and recognize those communities' connection to the land, to the water, and to their ancestors. So walking today to campus, it was kind of a festive scene. It is a Sunday afternoon. The cherry trees are starting to blossom. And there are many students who are participating in the rite of taking graduation photographs, even though we're not having in-person graduations. And this is the statue Bookin, which resides just right outside the library on the Terrell Mall. A student has placed her robes on Bookin. It is a little bit cloudy this afternoon, and you may be able to make her out spraying some champagne on the mall out there. So pretty festive morning to come to campus. So today I'm going to talk about the Library of Leonard and Virginia Woolf. I recall when I heard about this one-year temporary job that led me here, I got on the World Wide Web back in 1998, and there was a one-paragraph description of the library. I had assumed that Washington State University had a collection, maybe of first editions of Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf. But what I realized when I got here is that the collection was very significant. And I'm going to spend the bulk of my time talking today about Leonard and Virginia Woolf's library, and also the Hogarth Press Collection that we developed, the press that the Woolfs started in their home on Hogarth Street in 1917. You'll hear me mention probably at some point the Bloomsbury Group. So this is a group that combines a series of friendships from college and marriages and friends and lovers into a loosely affiliated group of authors, intellectuals, academics, artists, and others. And in addition to collecting Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf's works and those of the Hogarth Press, we've collected Bloomsbury Group, not only this more tightly kind of defined group of Bloomsbury, but really anybody that had anything to do with Bloomsbury over the years. So the Library of Leonard and Virginia Woolf, and I just want to apologize in advance if any of the pictures are a little bit bad. That's because I took them, but this will give you a sense of the collection. It comprises over 9,900 books. It's kept in our temperature-controlled rare book vault with about 60-odd thousand other rare books on many other topics. I'll talk briefly about a couple of the other rare book collections, but there are substantial holdings here. But if I was to choose a single kind of greatest, most internationally significant collection, it would definitely be the Library of Leonard and Virginia Woolf. So 9,900 books is a big number. Another way to think about it is there's 217 3-foot shelves full of books. That's another way of looking at it. So it goes all the way down this hallway, turns to the right, and then does a little loop. And I'll have more pictures showing the extent of the library. So probably the first question that you and any sane person would ask is, why is this British author's library out in Palouse, the Palouse country, where lentils grow so beautifully? And that really comes down to a friendship. Before I change the slide, I just want to point out this is the Woolf's own copy of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. This is their personal copy. It's the copy that they hand set the type for themselves. It's a copy that former English professor John Elwood saw when he visited Leonard Woolf at his country house and asked Leonard Woolf about it. And the story, according to Elwood, is that Leonard went into his house, rummaged around, found The Wasteland, and kind of pitched it over to Leonard across the garden. We're assuming he caught it, but anyways, that was a story that Elwood told, not only about this particular book, but about how the Woolfs used their books and treated them as tools, collected them, loved books, but were not above throwing them some distance to friends. So how did the library come here? Well, John Elwood that I mentioned and his spouse Karen Elwood and their son Sean Elwood were in the UK in 1967. During this time, they met Nancy and Fred Lucas, who were proprietors of a bookstore near Leonard Woolf's country house. They became fast friends. They visited Leonard Woolf late in Woolf's life. And when Leonard Woolf passed away and a good chunk of his library was coming up for sale, Nancy Lucas, the bookseller, wrote to Karen Elwood. Karen showed the letter to John. John got in touch with the librarian at the time at Washington State University, and WSU put in a bid to buy books at Monk's house and then in 1972 to buy a large number of books at Leonard Woolf's London house in Victoria Square. In between that, there are a couple of Sotheby's sales. WC bought some of the books that we bid against, but a couple hundred of the fanciest, most expensive books were bought by the Harry Ransom Research Center at University of Texas. So some of those first editions, some of those signed association copies are in Texas now. After those large acquisitions, WC was able to purchase about 400 books from Trekkie Parsons, who had taken some of the contents from Monk's house and donated them to the University of Sussex, including some records from the Hogarth Press. But she also kept a number of Hogarth Press titles and other volumes that WC was able to buy. In 1979, we bought 400 books from Cecil Wolf, and these were books that the Wolfs had loaned him or given him over time. And then in 1983, WSU purchased 100 books from Vanessa Bell, Virginia Woolf's sister, son, and Virginia Woolf's biographer. So through these purchases, we were really able to acquire the great bulk of the Library of Leonard and Virginia Woolf as they would have known it. There are books, of course, floating around, some at repositories, some occasionally come up on the market. The Woolfs often gave books to their friends. And so over the years, we've been able to purchase more books that we know were part of their library, in addition to other sorts of association copies. So there's a bibliography that came with the Woolf Library from the booksellers. And I'm just showing this screen, basically this picture, to show that we have some idea about how the Woolfs had arranged their books on different floors of their country home and their home in London. And this is a first entry into the collection, but it's quite out of date. So a little bit on the custodial history of the Library of Leonard and Virginia Woolf. When it first came to WSU, it was part of a humanities library, and it stayed there from 1971 to 1978. There's John Elwood there in action, looking at volumes as they were displayed in the Holland Library in the 1970s. And then when the department where I work in, Manuscripts, Archives, and Special Collections, was formed in 1978, the Humanities Library, including the Woolf Library, came to Manuscripts, Archives, and Special Collections, and they were interfiled with the other rare books in the department. And this is how the library was arranged from 1978 to 2010. After I became the head of Special Collections and I had the ability to, I recognized the need from Woolf scholars and really my own desire to see this library back together, because I think the power of the library is really in the range of subjects. And there's something profound about seeing the totality of the Woolf Library not mixed in with other books from the other rare book collections. I mean, in some ways, it's like what used to be like visiting a friend's house and paging through their record collection or their own libraries. You can really glean quite a bit about the wide range of tastes that the Woolfs had, notes about their friendships. You can learn quite a bit about Virginia Woolf's family from the library. So in 2010, two graduate students, Andrew McCarthy and Nora Weichert Custard, both English graduate students, helped me pull out all the books and refile them so that they're together once again where they remain today. So what's the big deal about this library? Well, there's all kinds of fantastic books, and I'm just going to show a few of them. This is Virginia Woolf's copy of a series of lectures given by Roger Fry. She did her own binding here or book repair. She would often take contact paper, put it over the covers of books to secure them. That's her own handwriting there on the label. And then she made her own index to this series of lectures. So this is a nice example of these personalized books, these unique aspects of the library that show the Woolf's reading and engagement with the books. And it truly is fun to go on these shelves and you see these manuscript labels in Virginia Woolf's hand of these books that she's rebound. There are quite a few books that she bound from the French literature collection. Here's a copy of Proust, again with the trademark contact papers. This was likely a paperback volume, so she did this to keep her books serviceable and I think also add a bit of beauty. And while we're on the topic of Virginia Woolf bindings, this is probably the fanciest binding of the collection that she did. It's full leather. She developed her own insignia there with the kind of heart shape in the middle of the spine. So another beautiful example. And then there's the same design. You can see her work on the inside cover of the Odyssey. Now, Virginia Woolf kept reading notebooks, so many of her notes about what she read are in those, but there are examples in the library of when she engaged with the text directly. Some of the best examples are in their extensive collection of classics. Virginia Woolf studied with a tutor, Janet Case, to learn Greek. This is her copy of the Odyssey with her own notes in the margins. And then her own copy of Aeschylus, again with notes. And then she inherited a library of classical texts from her brother Toby when Toby passed away. And Toby enjoyed drawing on the end papers of the boat, so some of his pencil sketch drawings. And this is something that Toby inherited potentially, or at least saw his father, Sir Leslie Stephen, doing. Sir Leslie Stephen was the editor of the Dictionary of National Biography, also an author in his own right. And when he passed away, Virginia Woolf inherited more than 1,000 volumes from his library that are now part of the Woolf Library here at WSU. And that library, her father's library, really served as her own kind of personal library where she could go through and read extensively in a way that she could do since she was denied the Cambridge education that her brothers received. Sir Leslie Stephen loved doing these animal drawings, and these are just a couple of examples of them from the books. So the library also has many presents and charming association copies. I think this tells you something about Virginia Woolf's interest. For her 16th birthday, her siblings got her a copy of Samuel Johnson's Lives of the Most Eminent English Poets. I guess for fun reading, they put these quotes in, and you'll notice the inscription at the top, they addressed it to Goat, which apparently was one of her nicknames among her family members. Other gifts, this is a copy of the Anatomy of Melancholy from her friend Violet Dickinson. You can see Virginia Woolf's name inscribed at the top. This book is missing its title page, so somebody went in and did a manuscript version of it to preserve that. Another charming book. This one has a beautiful green Moroccan binding and just a beautiful book to behold. So Virginia Woolf wasn't the only one who brought books into the library. Leonard Woolf had his collection of texts. He studied classics. He studied them to such a degree as a young man and as a college student that he was able to read Latin and Greek with a great fluency. Here's his copy of Eumenides. And Leonard Woolf penned this poem in the book. And so the books also have a number of these inscriptions and other bits of provenance that make them so fascinating today. Leonard Woolf, probably more than Virginia, was a great annotator of his books. So what he tended to do was write in the margins, but he created his own indexes at the ends of the book. So this is his copy of the speeches of Adolf Hitler with passages in the text underlined and an extensive index that he created. The library is also chock-a-block with ephemera from the Woolf. So when they went on vacations, saving things like these ticket stubs from museums in Athens, they would often leave them in books along with letters and other bits and bobs of papers. And those we've organized into a small collection of ephemera that have links back into the books where these pieces were first found. Along the same line, with the library came a collection of maps. So here are a couple of examples of maps from the country where they had their country home. Virginia Woolf did the bindings for these. You can see here her trademark manuscript labels. The map of Rodmell also has Leonard Woolf's notes of boundaries along the map. So small collection of maps, which also adds interest to the library. There are books from important dates, gifts. This is one of my favorite ones. It's a nice way to talk about the Hogarth Press because for Virginia Woolf's 33rd birthday, Leonard Woolf gave her this first edition copy of Sir Walter Scott's The Abbot. You can see the inscription there in the middle of the screen. He also gave her a green purse. We don't know what happened to the purse, of course, but the book has survived here. And it was at this tea for her birthday that they decided to start the Hogarth Press and probably get a bulldog they would name John. So the Hogarth Press did start. And when the Woolf Library came to WSU, my predecessors noticed right away that there was not a complete collection of Hogarth Press imprints. Indeed, there are many, many gaps in it. So starting a good 50 years ago now, we began collecting the Hogarth Press seriously. If you see the kind of highlighted bit there on the bottom of the shelf there, those are two of our 3 copies of 2 stories. This is the very first thing that the Woolfs ever printed. So it was limited to a run of 150 copies. One of the great rarities of collecting the Hogarth Press. This is a brighter copy. And we also have 2 other copies, so 3 copies out of that run. And we also have an example of a binding variant, this blue cloth that is much rarer than the red. And it just so happens that the Woolfs had a little bit of this blue cloth left over, and Virginia Woolf used it to rebind her copy of Dickens. So you can see a little bit of 2 stories there upside down, along with the Nicholas Nickleby on the spine. Just a couple of the very early Hogarth Press things that we have that are really fascinating. I think the second book that they published, Katherine Mansfield's Prelude, it had a very small number of block illustrations that Mansfield liked, but apparently Virginia Woolf did not like it. And so most of the copies of the run don't have it, but we do have a nice example of this wood block. So both the plain and the ones with the Ferguson block. And then one other really nice rarity, and probably the scarcest of all, is that when Leonard Woolf's brother died in World War I, they put together a small edition of his poems that they printed. It was privately circulated at Cecil's funeral. There's just only 3 listed in existence, and one of them is here at Washington State University. So the Hogarth Press, in addition to publishing all of Virginia Woolf's novels, poetry, also published a number of more curious titles, and Diane Gillespie's done quite a bit of research on these unusual items that they printed at the Hogarth Press. There are a couple of mysteries or crime books. Perhaps it's not well known today that the Hogarth Press also were the first publishers in English of the works of Sigmund Freud. So we have a good example of titles that the Hogarth Press put out from the Institute of Psychoanalysis. The Woolfs also published some of the first translations in English of classic Russian works. And to do this, both Leonard and Virginia Woolf studied Russian so that they could discuss Russian words with Kotyliansky, their Russian translator, and help create more literary translations from the Russian. So in the Woolf Library, in addition to books on history and English literature and poetry, the things we might expect, there's a nice example of Russian dictionaries, there's a grammar, and then quite a number of other Russian texts that they use for this activity of publishing translations out of the Hogarth Press. This is a real fun book, also hand-set at the Hogarth Press, Virginia Woolf's essay on being ill, and our particular copy has this letter in it that I'll just briefly read because I'm sure it's hard to see on your screens. Virginia Woolf addresses it to an unknown dear madame. As one of the guilty parties, I bow down to your strictures upon the printing of On Being Ill. I agree that the color is uneven, the letters not always clear, the spacing inaccurate, and the word campion should read companion. All I have to urge an excuse is that printing is a hobby carried on in the basement of a London house, that as amateurs, all instruction in the art was denied us, that we have picked up what we know for ourselves, and that we practice printing in the intervals of life that are otherwise engaged. In spite of all this, I believe that you can already sell your copy for more than the guinea you gave, as the edition is largely oversubscribed, so that though we have not satisfied your taste, we hope that we have not robbed your purse. So quite a charming letter in the text, pasted into this particular volume. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about collecting the Hogarth Press. The great bibliography of it by Woolmer, the checklist. I have my colleague Julie King's heavily annotated copy that's marked up to show everything that we've purchased over the years. And this is a little bit from our wish list. It's a little bit out of date, but we've really tried to collect everything ever published by Virginia Woolf in British, in American editions. Anything from the Hogarth Press we don't have, we go after. Any impression, any state. We've gone back, and texts that we have, we've gone back to collect the dust jackets. So this has been an ongoing effort. And this effort also includes ephemera related to the Hogarth Press, also materials related to the Bloomsbury Group, things like art pamphlets from exhibits that Vanessa Bell and others gave. So really trying to get a comprehensive collections of the kind of print culture that is part of Virginia Woolf's legacy and that of Bloomsbury and the Hogarth Press. So our great partner over the years has been John Richardson of York Harbor Books, and he's really just magnificent about ferreting out these unusual association copies, and has been a great aid in helping us develop the collections over the years. Before I turn away from books, I just want to say that we do have some Virginia Woolf manuscripts, not as many. We have a small volume of where Virginia Woolf, for a very short period, kept her own accounts. So we have this. We have a couple of letters. And this was a real great triumph for us in terms of collecting, is that the last Hogarth Press pamphlet that we did not have, we were able to purchase in 2020, thanks to a bequest from our long-term cataloger, Leela Ludeking. She left the department $10,000. And we used part of that gift to purchase the calcium bread scandal, which happened when the British government during wartime started introducing calcium to the bread to add more nutrients to the British people. So kind of a fun text. Just going to say a couple of words about tools for using the Woolf collection. There is a short title catalog. You can buy it from Amazon, or better yet, from a local dealer, or you can buy it used. It's also available via our website, so you can look at it online. There's an excellent introduction by Diane Gillespie, and it's a comprehensive overview of what's in the library. There's also guides to some of these smaller collections, like the map collection and the collection of insert papers that I mentioned. Those are on the website. And then I promise I'll be really brief here, but if you're not too daunted by our university's library catalog, I'd encourage you to search. You can search without logging in. If you type in Woolf Library and hit search, you're going to end up with a whole mess of results. That's just the way the modern catalogs are. But if you look to the left and resign that, you can see there's an author listed of Library of Leonard and Virginia Woolf, and that'll just pull together all the Woolf bibliographic records so that you can browse them online. And unlike the short title catalog, these will have much more detailed notes about, say, if Virginia Woolf was the binder, if the volumes are annotated or anything else. But of course, you don't need to look at any of these tools at all. Just send me an email, call the department, and we're happy to help you get into the library and engage with it. So I'm just going to mention a couple other collections really briefly before I wind up and take collections. A couple of my favorites. Another important book collection is from the papers and the overall collection of Lucullus v. McWhorter. He was a rancher in Yakima in the early 20th century. He helped the Yakima Nation fight off a state of Washington attempt to divert water from the Yakima River and was adopted into the tribe. He met members of the Nez Perce tribe and wrote several important books, including Hear Me, My Chief, and Yellow Wolf, His Own Story. And Yellow Wolf, His Own Story remains in print. It's the only Nez Perce account of the 1877 Nez Perce War. And McWhorter wrote that by conducting numerous interviews with Yellow Wolf, who was a warrior in these events. And it came out. And in addition to that, there are 51 boxes of papers, many interviews, notes, just all sorts of cultural information, 20 boxes of photos, and then his own library that's all here at WSU as well. Another important collection came in a couple of years ago. This is the Vernon Gallup collection. It's over 10,000 volumes related to angling. This includes more than 400 different editions of Isaac Walton's The Complete Angler, including the first edition, all the 17th century printings. When the first part of the library was appraised at the donation, it was valued at over $2 million. We also added his periodicals to the library. The family left us an endowment, so we're beginning work cataloging it. So if you have any interest in outdoor recreation, in British or American angling, this is a really terrific resource. And this is a collection that just came in, I guess, appropriately as the pandemic was coming on. It's Larry Seeborg, who for decades ran an ad in A.B. Bookman's Weekly that he collected disaster books. And there's 180 examples. If you look at the edition of The Sinking of the Titanic, on the left there, you can see the book is not nearly so high. These were photographed by my cell phone, flat. The book on the left is a salesman dummy or a copy that the salesman would take around hawking the books. And then if you bought it, you would get the full edition later on. These salesman copies, which are represented in numerous cases in this genre of disaster books, would sometimes have different binding examples. So you could decide if you wanted the fancier binding or the less fancy binding. And then, in this era before newspapers, before television and other things, one way that many would remember these catastrophic events was buying one of these disaster books. So an extensive collection, and I think it'll be a nice one for classes into the future. So classes, before the pandemic, we would have 50 odd classes into the department every summer. There I am holding 2 stories. A couple of years ago, I have more gray hair, as you can see now. To the right of me is Sir Leslie Stephen's own copy of the Dictionary of National Biography that's annotated, part of the Woolf Library. We have it in the reading room. We do offer research support. A colleague snapped this photo of me in Halloween Viking gear, taking some photos, sending to colleagues. We also love it when scholars visit. This is a graduate student, Matthew Holliday from the University of Nottingham. He traveled all the way from the UK to Pullman to spend a week working in the library as part of his dissertation, looking at the poetry of Wordsworth and Virginia Woolf. And so this is really special to me when scholars come and work in the Woolf Library. The great Virginia Woolf scholar, Jane DeGay, described Pullman as kind of the holy grail for Woolf scholars in the UK. It's the furthest, we're the hardest to get to. But if you do make the journey, whether from Seattle or from the United Kingdom, I can promise you a warm welcome, buy you a coffee, and take you around the stacks to look at the books. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying I talked in some detail about the Woolf Library. There are many other collections. WSU is fortunate that through the 20th century, especially in the first quarter of the 20th century, we were regularly buying early printed books from the UK through dealers. So there's quite a good example of 17th century, 18th century literature. This broadside is a charming one. Oh dear, what can the matter be? And this one was actually, we scanned it and sent it to the Foundling Museum in London because apparently the ribbons was one way that foundlings were identified, that some people, when they left babies up for adoption, would leave this ribbon. And so this song apparently refers to this practice. So it was part of that exhibit. So just all kinds of unusual treasures to be found here. And I'm going to stop talking and drink some water. And I would love it if anyone has any questions.
Well, yeah, thank you, Rich. Give a hand for
Thanks.
the virtual or a loud hand to Trevor. Wonderful presentation. Wow, what terrific treasures you have over there in Pullman. Who knew?
Exactly.
We're rather Seattle-centric over here, as you probably can imagine. And you really do have some wonderful items there. And what I'm kind of reminded of the Jefferson collection at the Library of Congress, of course, which had to be reproduced. But there is something about having the collection of not just their writings, but the stuff that they had in their home, and to show the breadth of their interests. And of course, the circle they're in, how many books have been written about the Bloomsbury crowd? I mean, as many as Napoleon, I think. So it's really endlessly interesting. So there are some questions. Let me see if I can, I don't know whether you can see them. I can. Let me see. Congratulations to Margaret. I love the monkey smoking a pipe. A compliment on Leonard Woolf's handwriting. So here's one. The Yellow Wolf book is very engaging. This is from David Wertheimer, and an important perspective on Native history that's really brought to light. This is from Amanda Amanda Clark from Whitworth University Library. Thank you, Trevor. Do you have a sense of if they culled their collection regularly, or if they accumulated it more haphazardly?
That's a great question. There is a little bit of evidence in that bibliography I mentioned, Hollyman and Treacher. There's apparently a note that they saw of Leonard Woolf saying, keep this book, but you can go ahead and sell the rest. So I think books were coming in and going out all the time, loaned. One thing that happened when the first big lot of books from Monk's House came to WSU is that there were many multi-volume sets that only had a couple of books from the series. And then when the books came from the house in London, those series were reunited. So I imagine that the books were spread between both London and their homes in the country, and then lots of gift-giving friends loaning. So there are books scattered. I'm grateful that WSU had the foresight in 1970 to start purchasing, or 69 when this first started happening, because certainly Virginia Woolf has only increased in interest and popularity. There's a society, an international society of Virginia Woolf. filled with the kindest scholars you could ever meet, and who hold an annual conference every year, alternating between the United States and the United Kingdom. And so, the fact that WSU was able to make these purchases and to keep a huge amount of this library together before it's further scattered was something really important. But yes, I think there are Woolf Library books elsewhere, and maybe some will come back on the market again. A couple hundred certainly are at the Ransom Center, along with most every other 20th century British author's papers. They just bought everything for a period.
You were lucky to get anything from Ransom. I mean, they had unlimited funds.
That's right.
Right.
Especially when oil is booming.
Yeah, that's right. It is cyclical probably for them. Yeah, right. Yeah. There's Jackie Williams. Jackie, you've mentioned a book, The Way We Ate, in 1996. I think that was, this is what the WSU Press published one of her books. She's written a number of books on food-related books. I think the potato, or I know it's all potato exhibit at University of Washington. So she, Jackie, I know, thinks fondly of your university. I'm trying to read. It's a little hard to read. Some thank yous. Great presentation. There's a question from Lillian Dabney. She's at Folio. How does a collection at WU complement one at WSU? So does the University of Washington have any Hogarth or Virginia Woolf materials?
They may have some. They have, I believe, more rare books than we have. We share some donors. There was a Judge Beals who left us a couple of very nice books. I know there's quite a few more at UW. Our collections of manuscripts, which I really didn't talk about at all, but in the basement of manuscripts, archives, and special collections, we have more than 1,000 manuscript collections, about 3.2 miles of papers of Northwest, historians, politicians, groups, and our papers tend to complement each other, maybe more so than our rare book collections. UW's tended to collect more intensively on the western side of the state. We collect more on the eastern side of the state, but there's some nice overlaps of those materials. And I really enjoy working with my colleagues at UW. Carla Rickerson, who I know is involved with this group, she's one of my early mentors in the area and reached out to me when I first started my job, which I appreciated very much.
I think Carla's on our is with us today. Yes, there she is. Okay. Hi, Carla. I think she's. Are you down in Arizona, Carla? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I was muted. Yes, I'm down in Arizona, and I was lucky to get Wi-Fi at my sister's house, so I was able to attend.
Oh, great. We're delighted. Yeah. There's a question here about whether you can talk some more about the document you mentioned, which shows how the books were arranged when they stored them. So this is, I think we saw one page where it had, the first floor dining room or whatever, it had different things. So how extensive is that particular document?
It's a couple pages of typescript, Helen. It's in the front matter of the Hollyman and Treacher catalog that was prepared when the first chunks of the Woolf Library came. I made myself copies so I can just run a PDF and email it to you. I think it's pretty fascinating. You can see where they had their poetry gathered together. Of course, I think this is what the book seller noted in kind of packing up the library, but it gives some hint about their earlier organization of the library.
Is there additional T.S., this is from Susan Allen, additional T.S. Eliot material in the library?
I wish we had manuscript material. There's not manuscript, but in terms of his print works, I think we have a very good collection of Hogarth Press first editions. When anything by T.S. Eliot comes up, since he's a member of the Bloomsbury Group, we've been buying over the years. So I think there are some nice things to look at. Susan, if you're up in Washington State ever, I don't know if your daughters are nearby, or if you ever come up, I'd be glad to pull them all out for you.
Okay, not at this point, but I owe you some archival material.
Oh, okay, great.
I haven't forgotten.
Okay.
Coming soon.
Jackie, there's a note here from Steve Ellersick to. I guess you're gonna make a presentation to the Pioneer Association of Washington coming up in June. So I guess he's looking forward to that. Here's somebody ask, Trevor's email. Trevor, can I send your university email out to?
Of course.
To the group? I'll be sending an email out to everybody, so I'll do that.
The camera is actually.
Oh, here's somebody's already given that to you, so
There.
you have it now, Greg. Okay. So this is from Harvey Sadis. How did Linda and Virginia learn their craft? He's talking about the Hogarth Press.
Mhm.
How much of it was hand set, or did they employ monotype or linotype? So what was their process in publishing their books, or printing their books, I should say?
Yeah, the Woolf started the Hogarth Press with hand setting the type, but you could see already from 2 stories to Prelude that was just quite a large jump up in complexity and length. And so pretty soon they sought out commercial publishers to publish, especially the longer works. But then they did continue on to hand print some of the smaller things, some of the poetry. I don't believe they employed monotype or linotype. The Woolfs also sought to learn their craft. And I think, as Virginia Woolf mentioned in that letter, they were denied the opportunity to really learn printing because they were middle class, and they didn't go through the traditional route of becoming journeyman printers. And I don't mean to put her on the spot, but I do see Diane Gillespie on the call. So Diane, do you want to add anything about their learning to print?
I don't think I really have anything to add other than the fact that they did get a lot of criticism, as you indicated, for various aspects. And sometimes they didn't like the illustrations and they weren't happy with their own process. So they did ultimately turn it over to commercial printers, who didn't always make them happy either. But it was inevitable because the press grew and grew.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't possibly handle it all themselves.
I think too, I think the modernist style and the styles they employed in some ways feel so contemporary. And so it's maybe hard to imagine what these books would have looked like in British booksellers at the time. I mean, they were these odd shapes, these colorful papers. Vanessa Bell's famous and beautiful abstract covers for Virginia Woolf's novels. I showed Mrs. Dalloway at the start. They just look so much different, I think, than anything else on the market. They really were doing new things and publishing the authors that are now very canonical, but at the time were quite daring and unusual. So I think just kind of thinking about those things a little bit is fun. And that, this move from handset to commercial publications, especially for the long things, really was an important shift for them to publish the volume of materials that they wanted to.
A lot of it, it's just a question of volume versus kind of getting the content out there, as opposed to just producing great works of great books and great works of art. I think they were involved in getting content out for their group. I did love the covers, and I was going to ask about that. Some of those looked, I guess they were publishing up into the kind of Art Deco period, so I could see some Deco influences. But I'm wondering if some of that, some of the earlier covers were from the 20s and were really quite avant-garde for the time. So you're kind of saying that was probably the case.
I think
It maybe
so.
didn't help. It maybe didn't help sales any.
It certainly made things stand out. And
Yeah.
I think the keepsake Bonnie used the design for from Kew Gardens, and Kew Gardens was one of their early hand pressed titles that received very favorable reviews and led to this collecting rush of Hogarth Press titles. So yeah, I think we have some examples of other British 20th century novels, the very much more kind of romantic titles that you'd see during the day elsewhere on the bookshelf. So you can really imagine how these things did stand out in an unusual and innovative way.
Right. One other thing, or actually two other things. One is on the Hogarth Press. Did I understand right that your university started collecting those books before they got the Virginia Woolf material? Is that something they started collecting back early on?
It was really at the same time when the Woolf Library came in, kind of a mixture of the Woolfs not keeping copies of everything they printed, and then also how some of the distribution of the library, like through Trekkie Parsons and her gifts to University of Sussex. So not everything was retained. And the Hogarth Press, if you look at the Woolmer checklist, so many of the editions have just very minor publishing variants, different impressions. So if you get deep into collecting the Hogarth Press, there's a lot to do and so many variations. Our collections are especially strong up to Virginia Woolf's death in 1941, but we've really collected anything related to Hogarth Press for some time now. So it's been a very fun adventure. And I think too, if you work on Bloomsbury Group, having a place where all this printed ephemera is all together at once, it can be quite powerful and interesting, I think.
I was remiss in not mentioning Bonnie's wonderful keepsake, which I'll hold up here. Now, everybody that got their journal, all the book club members got their keepsake. There's the border that you were talking about that she was able to take from the Kew Gardens book. And then there's a lot of wonderful text in here that describes the collection and that you provided. And so you and Bonnie did a wonderful collaboration on this, and Nils Dickman also was kind of a coordinator. I asked Nils to do that, and he took his job very seriously and got everybody to do their stuff on time. So we were able to get this out with our journal to everybody. So for those of you who are not members, should you like to get one of these, there's a way you can do that. We'll be including this and the current journal to anybody that joins here in the as a result of this meeting. So, well, with that, is there anything else? I know it'd be so great if we could just go to the other room and have some wine, have some crackers, some cheese, and just talk among ourselves. I mean, it's such a great group, and it's great to be able to gather together like this, but it's like there'd be so much more we could do if we were all together. So, but if anybody else has anything they'd like to say, comments, questions, additional questions for Trevor, just unmute yourself and speak up.
Gary?
Yes.
Just a quick question. I was just curious, how many copies of the subscriber editions does WSU have? Because I think the subscriber editions were all inscribed by either Leonard or Virginia to the subscriber.
Oh, that's from David up there.
Yeah, I think we should have them all from the Hogarth Press. I think about some of them. On Being Ill was one of the subscriber editions. I'd have to look at individual titles, but we should have a pretty comprehensive collection of at least one of the editions of every subscriber volume. Thank you. I also just want to say just quickly, I was thinking about the Hogarth Press and about Bonnie's beautiful keepsake. We bought a letterpress here at WSU, and I met with a graduate student in English who's been kind of the mover and shaker between our letterpress. And we set 2 lines of type and printed some stationery. It took about 3.5 hours. It didn't help that I set the line the wrong way the first time through, but that's the process. But it is such a wonderful, slow, thoughtful, and fun process to do. And I just love the result. I'm really going to cherish my keepsake here in my office, both on campus and at home.
Well, I want to thank you, Trevor, and thank everybody else for joining us today. There's still Sunday left. Enjoy yourself, and we'll see you next year, or we'll see you at some of our events coming up. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Is adjourned. Okay.